Sup, YouTube users, we are going to talk about man's search for meaning today. This is a big one, to be honest. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. This is a book written by a psychologist who was a Jew in World War II. So he actually was taken into the concentration camps, had the experience in the concentration camps, and studied them and observed them as a psychologist, and came to his own conclusions about life, meaning, love, and all of the good stuff. So, the first part of the book is just the story, written almost like a novel, of his experiences in the concentration camps. It's very cool that he omits certain things, because there's parts in the book where he says, like, you know what happened, I don't need to describe it, any history book will tell you that. So he leaves out the details that other history books have described, and he tells about his personal experience inside the concentration camps, which is very, very I was going to say cool, but cool is not the right word for that, because obviously it was not cool what he went through, but just fascinating and insightful to read. And I thank him for writing that, for sharing his experiences in that way, because it definitely opened my eyes and definitely gave me a better, bigger perspective on the world we are living in. The second part of the book is his analyzation of what those experiences meant, his thoughts, his comments, his analysis of trying to pull the lessons from the experiences that he had, so we can learn more about psychology and learn more about becoming happy people, and to try and pull that out of a journey through the concentration camp is just inspiring. What strength of character, what a courageous man. And he was going to write the book. He was going to publish the book anonymously, but he then moves on to say why he didn't publish it anonymously, because he said that if it was published anonymously, it would take the strength away from the content. The content needed an owner to make it, to give it that impact and to give it that power. So that's why he chose to published the book with his name on it, because he wanted the material to stand up to and to meet the value that it had, and it does have value, and I think it benefits from not being anonymous, because we know that this was a real man, and we know that this was his name, and we know that this really genuinely happened to this specific person. And what an eye-opening story, and what fantastic conclusions he has drawn from it. So let's get into some of the conclusions that I personally loved with inside of this book. The first thing I've got here on my screen is the super meaning, and I'm just going to pause. Okay, so the ultimate meaning necessarily exceeds and surpasses the finite intellectual capacities of man. So, in other words, we are all dumbasses, and we cannot grasp the ultimate meaning of life. We, as human beings, will never find it. What is demanded of man is not, as some existential philosophers teach, to endure the meaningless of life, but rather to bear his incapacity to grasp its unconditional meaningfulness in rational terms. So It's not that there isn't a meaning of life. It's that human beings will never have the capacity to understand the further meaning of life, and what is demanded of man, that he bear the fact that he will never understand. And that's the super meaning. It's not that it's meaningless, it's that we cannot find the meaning. So, cool. Very awesome that he would say that, and I agree with him 100%. So another part in the book, he is describing misery, and he's describing man's capability to reframe a situation and put a positive light on it. So we know that everything is perception. We know that we can view a negative situation, we can decide to find something good in that situation. Always, it's our choice, our mental choice, to choose an optimistic attitude. Okay? And so, let's read this quote out. The human capacity to creatively turn life's negative aspects into something positive or constructive. In other words, what matters is to make the best of any given situation. The best, however, is that which in Latin is called optimum. Hence the reason I speak of a tragic optimism. That is, an optimism in the face of tragedy and in view of the human potential, which at its best. Okay, and then so let's just break that down. A tragic optimism. That is that, if we go by what the Buddha says, that life is suffering, we also have this tragic optimism, that we have optimism in the face of all of this suffering, and that can give your life meaning. So there's this tragic optimism that, yeah, everything kind of sucks, but we have this choice to be optimistic throughout the tragedy. There's three things: turning suffering into a human achievement and accomplishment, that is, to live through the suffering, but persistently to achieve through the suffering, to accomplish through the suffering. 2, derive from guilt the opportunity to change oneself for the better. Hence, if you're guilty, if you've done something wrong, if you've made a mistake, learn, adapt, change. And 3, derive from life's transitoriness an incentive to take responsible action. Here's one I feel like I have not gotten down. The fact that life is so transitory, everything is impermanent, but from that, within that, we can choose to be responsible. We can choose to take responsible action. It's not a nihilistic worldview. Everything should be destroyed because it will all die anyway, but yes, it's impermanence, but yes, we can be responsible within that. So again, it's what matters most is to make the best of any given situation, achieve through the suffering, change when you've made a mistake, and be responsible despite the fact that it's all transitory. I think these are some very good, very strong values to hold to. This is, I think, from the second part of the book, because that's where the philosophy and the psychology is, and the actual analysis of breakdown of meaning. There's a quote here which is, let me just set up the kind of story leading to it. There was a woman who, her young son lived until he was 8 years old and then died. I think during the war, and he as a psychologist asked her to view that from her deathbed and say, if you could look back peacefully on your life, what would you say? And she says, as for myself, I can look back peacefully on my life, for I can say my life was full of meaning, and I have tried hard to fulfill it. I've done my best. I've done the best for my son. My life was no failure. So she originally thought that her life was valueless because she lost her son and she didn't have a child. I actually think she had one other child as well, but I think she had one other child as well. But anyway, she was obviously distraught because she lost one child and she thought that she hadn't been able to raise that child and her life was meaningless. But then, as a psychologist, he was able to flip her mentality around, and she saw that by the same token, it had become clear as well that a life of short duration, for example of her dead boy, could be so rich in joy and love that it could contain more meaning than a life lasting 80 years. So she was able to see that she'd given her son love during those 80 years, during those 8 years of his life. But because she'd given him love and joy and happiness in those 8 years, there is more meaning in those 8 years than there could be in another life of 80 years. And I thought that was a really powerful comment because it made me think, yeah, you've got to give love and joy and happiness and live as a life as fulfilling as you possibly can, because you could live a mundane life and it will have no meaning whatsoever. But if you live passionately for a year, that could be worth more than a mundane life of 80 years or 100 years. So it just reminded me to live as joyfully as possible in every moment, because it's worth something. And